Hey, what is up guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. So GT7 in 2024 was very much a mixed bag. It started off the year strong with consistent updates and eventually dropped off in the latter half. So that got me thinking, what are 10 ways GT7 needs to improve in 2025? Now I do have a few rules to this list, so in terms of those rules, it's certainly going to be about improving core features that are already in the game. Now things such as cars and tracks will not be included in this, however I do feel like in separate videos I would like to talk about my wish list when it comes to those. So the first point in this list is making all cars have a purpose in game. Now one thing that's really bugged me about GT7, especially when it comes to the likes of EVs and historic machineries, is that they lack any real place to actually be used. And it's made even more frustrating considering a lot of classics and EVs get added as post-launch content, and I don't doubt that will change going into 2025. Now even if a car isn't the most interesting to absolutely everyone, I think if Polyphony have taken the time to actually model that car in game and how long it actually takes them, it should have a worthwhile place to actually run. And I would say as it stands, there's probably 30 to 40% of cars in GT7 that probably never ever get driven because there's nowhere to run them. Next up then, economy balance. This was most recently highlighted by the Mount Panorama 1 hour endurance, which had an incredibly low payout of 140k for one single hour of running. If we compare some other events in game, this is nothing new either. Taking Sardinia on the grind event, this pays you out 725k every 24 minutes or so. That is a completely dry race with no weather. However, the high speed ring, which does feature randomized weather, takes around the same time and is much more complex. So with this event, you're looking at around about 240k with a clean race bonus for the exact same amount of time. And unfortunately, some of these incredible events never get a look in because players have no motivation to go there. Now this is the same for the Mount Panorama 1 hour. This was a very fresh thing that we'd not had for about 2 years, paying you 140k, of course with the clean race bonus 210. And if we go ahead to make a custom race, it pays you out even more doing it in a custom race than it did actually running the official sanctioned one by Polyphony themselves. It's ridiculous just how all over the place the economy is. Next up, we need to talk about the car classes. So for me, more classes would be a good thing to Gran Turismo 7. If we take the current grouping system for example, it is so vast and varied that a lot of these cars in these classes will never ever get a look in, and some of them don't even feel like they need to be there. I certainly think at this point they need to cut down the group ones and go for smaller classes, even if some of the classes may be a bit thin on the ground, to add that more competitive edge. So let's look at Group 4 for example. This is a very clustered grouping of cars. So we of course have GT4 machinery, we have front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, four wheel drive, we also have official touring cars, we have classic touring cars, all bundled into one category. I certainly think here going for a TCR category and a GT4 would work wonders for the competitiveness of this class and gives more cars a look in. If we also look at Group 3, again we have the likes of classic GT500 machinery, official GT3 machines, and we also start to see the inclusion of a lot of VGT machinery. I feel like go for official GT3, of course the classic GT500s and super silhouettes, and of course VGT GT3. Now in terms of Group 2, it's very similar. We have the likes of the F1 GTR, GT1 and CLK, which again could make their own class alone. We then have the 2008 GT500s, the 2016 GT500s. Again, it's just all over the place and really makes it difficult to get all of these cars competitive and useful in their classes. It's the same with Group 1 as well. We have Group C, LMP and more. I feel like they should certainly trim them down. So next up I have endurance racing returning. Now for me this is a crucial one to any single player Gran Turismo game. The endurance races have always been top notch. Even if they're not always the most interesting, it's always very rewarding to go ahead and be a 4, 8, 12 or 24 hour endurance race in real time. The closest we ever got to this returning was the Human Comedy mission selection, which unfortunately only features a one-time payout, and then there's no real reason to actually go back again and grind them out. There's no prize cars that can be awarded over and over again, and there's no repeating payout. So unfortunately, although these were very varied and did make for a nice variety of different types of endurance races, They weren't long enough, and again, there's no incentive to go back once you beat them. And this has been a key missing addition to Gran Turismo, is that endurance racing never properly returned. We need them longer, bigger and better than ever, featuring weather, day, night and more. All Polyphony need to do for this one is look back on what made the previous one so good, make them bigger and better, and make sure they have a worthy reward in them so that they're repeatable by the player. Next up then, weather and day-night cycle. This is something that is severely lacking in GT7. Of course, we do have these options in game, but it is severely limited, and I would like to see this spread to every single track in game. This is a very common feature that features in a lot of other modern day racing games, and for some reason GT7 refuses to update its current tracks to have this. One of the worst offenders for this is Interlagos, which is notorious for a lot of wet F1 races over the years, and unfortunately doesn't even feature wet weather. You'll also notice that there is a high chance at most tracks that the day-night cycle won't actually rotate from one to the other. It can go from morning to twilight, but then it won't go over a full 24-hour period. It will just get stuck there in the night, and that will be a lot. Now, to a lot of people this might not seem like a very necessary feature, however I feel like this will go a long way into breathing fresh life into current existing tracks, and again it will just completely shake them up into how they feel and how they drive depending on the time of day, or of course the weather. Next up is menu updates. Something that's always bugged me about the Gran Turismo games, especially the more modern they've got, is just how ancient their menus seem to be. Whilst many other modern day racing games have gone the way of streamlined menus and quick access into absolutely everything, you can guarantee if you want to get somewhere in GT7, you will have to go the long way around. Now of course we have seen some changes to the search system and race shop over the years, however it is still not perfect. It feels like you need to do 101 tasks to actually get where you want to be in game. I certainly feel like this needs improving for GT7, just making the menus that much better, and again they can clearly do it considering they have made improvements over time. I know to a lot of people, myself included, the kind of clunky menus of Gran Turismo games really add to the charm, but I feel like in 2025 there's no major excuse for this, having to do a million tasks to just get to one single place. So for me it certainly needs a bit of a shake up. Next up I have a sport mode update. Now for me, sport mode is incredibly tired at this point. The same system has been in place ever since the early days of GT Sport, and it never ever really receives a shake up, and when it does it's such a big deal for a week and then disappears back to the typical rinse and repeat formula. Usually you see race A features a bunch of road cars with no driver rating or safety rating. Typically in the middle you have a short sprint race with some of the racing machines, and then at the end you have a bit of a longer race that still isn't that long, at around about 20 minutes or so, sometimes even less. Now when this system rolled around with GT Sport, it felt like a very fresh idea. However, I would quite happily say over time, a lot more games have started doing this system but made it much more better. I just feel like it's a very tired formula at this point, and again it doesn't help when Polyphony constantly reuse the exact same track layouts and exact same cars over and over again, meaning that sometimes within a period of a couple of months you feel like you're racing the exact same races over and over again, and it's a huge shame because there's a lot of potential to this mode if they added more weather races, longer races and more on a more regular basis, or if they wanted to keep the typical formula, add something like a 1 hour endurance on the end each week as a daily race D. Next up I have making use of all the tracks in game. A little bit like when it came to the cars in my first point, I feel like if a track is in GT7 then Polyphony absolutely should be making use of it. There's a lot of tracks and layouts in game that never ever really get a look in, and again back to layouts, there's some layouts that you will never ever see featured and probably don't even know exist. Now if we take the likes of Northern Isle Speedway, this is a tiny little track that takes around about 20 seconds a lap and only has one single event. Again, kart racing here could be good, or all sorts of other things. Same with Route X, a lot of the faster cars in games could really do with a use around this type of test track, maybe a tomahawk like the Wind event. Broadbean is another example, just like Northern Isles Speedway, only features a Sunday Cup and then will never ever return after your first 15 minutes of gameplay. We also have the likes of Tsukuba as well, which whilst it does feature a bunch of events, never gets anything worthy of note, and that's a classic icon of the GT franchise. Blue Moon Speedway, if we look at all of these events, it does get a few of its layouts used, but if we go into Time Trial, you'll see just how many there are, and Infield B never ever gets a look in. This to me just means that there's a bunch of layouts in the game that will never ever receive a single solid event. And especially since we've seen how long it takes Polyphony to make these tracks for GT7, if they've gone ahead and put a layout in, why just leave it dormant for the longest time? Put something of substance in there and make use of every single track and layout you have in game. Now this is one that's talked about a lot, and that is penalty system changes. I see this all the time in my comment section, in that the penalty system is entirely broken in GT7, and unlike GT Sport, it's never ever received a single update of note. Now, well, if you want to go ahead and cut a huge chunk of the track and get away with it, you can guarantee, more than likely, you probably can. And the guy behind you that tries the same, well, they can probably get penalised for it. It's the exact same with the whole ramming and shunting part when it comes to races. You'll see people get absolutely wiped out, and the driver that did it completely gets away with it and goes on to take a win. This is even the case in the cleanest of lobbies like an A+S. I definitely feel like the penalty system has been completely ignored when it comes to GT7 and currently is far too inconsistent. Let's move on then to my final point of the video. So for me, this has to be engaging with the fans, and this is aimed directly at Polyphony. One of the most notorious things they do is completely ignore their community. You will see them put posts up about the World Series and of course sometimes a special event or two, but that is almost it. Everything with Polyphony is done so secretly, there's no openness or transparency, and for me, this is a major thing in 2025. A lot of other companies will tell you where they want to take the game, what they're working on, and what the fans want, to see if, of course, that's being acknowledged, and that is just not the case with Polyphony. Everything is complete secrecy with them, and they barely ever take notice of anything that fans say. In fact, the only time they will is if it blows up in their face and it causes such a stir. And even if something does get to that point where they have to apologise, they'll more than likely just put a quick post up and then go on like nothing ever happened. And honestly, being open with your fans is nothing new. Companies have been doing this for years, and you typically find that the companies that are much more open and responsive to fans and acknowledging what they've done wrong to be able to improve their product not only end up with a better product overall, but a lot more loyal fans. Where Gran Turismo and Polyphony go wrong is by almost completely ignoring their fan base, who are always helping trying to improve their product. Again, they need to really realise who helped get this franchise to where it is today as the behemoth of the racing series, and that is honestly the fan base. The way I see it, it can take years to build an empire and only minutes for it to crumble. So if anyone at Polyphony ends up watching this, just seriously engage with your fan base and see what they want from your game, see where you can improve, and if it again needs to wait until the next game, then just go ahead and do it. But again, take note of the people that have supported you for so many years. Now that's going to be it from me. These are the key ways I feel GT7 can improve on its core features and I guess overall as a product in 2025. I'll of course have the cars and tracks and all that stuff a little later down the line, but for me this is 10 core ways GT7 really needs to improve going forward for this year. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I will see you in the next one. Take care guys, peace.